Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. It's a situation that's, frankly, balancing on a knife's edge between diplomacy and all-out war. And let's just jump right in with this quote because it really hammers home the stakes. A new report is warning that we might be a lot closer to a major conflict than most people think. So we've got to pay attention. So how did we even get here? I mean, this crisis didn't just pop up overnight. To really get it, we've got to rewind the clock a little and see how a really fragile peace has just been shattered piece by piece. When you lay it all out like this, you start to see a really dangerous pattern emerge. First, you have an external conflict, then huge internal unrest inside Iran. And now you have these critical diplomatic talks happening while warships are moving into position. Each event just keeps dialing up the pressure. So, there's one version of this story, right? This is the hopeful path. It's the one being carved out at a negotiating table in Switzerland, where diplomats are, genuinely trying to find a way out of this mess. And this is coming straight from the Iranian delegation after they met with U.S. envoys. They're talking about finding common ground. Now, that's diplomatic speak, of course, but it's a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, a deal is possible. And this is a huge but. At the exact same time, a completely different and much louder story is playing out in the waters of the Middle East, and it paints a very, very different picture. And a lot of analysts are basically saying, look, don't just listen to the words in Geneva, watch the actions in the Gulf. They're pointing to these live-fire drills by Iran's Revolutionary Guard as the real message Tehran is sending. So what you have to wrap your head around is this massive contradiction. You have the language of peace and common ground happening in one room, and literally at the same time, you've got missiles being fired in a show of force. It's this classic duel, talking peace while preparing for war. All right, so let's hear from the people actually making the decisions here. What are the key leaders saying? Because their words give us a huge insight into what they're planning to do next. Okay, so Turkey, a major NATO ally, is trying to step in and play mediator here. President Erdogan says he's been talking directly to both President Trump and Iran's president, trying to pull everyone back from the edge. Meanwhile, you have the White House sending a very different signal, basically that its patience is wearing thin. And when the vice president mentions another option, well, there's not much mystery about what that other option is. Military action is clearly not off the table. And this, right here, this is the heart of the problem. This is why things are so stuck. The U.S. wants to talk about everything, the nuclear program, the missile program, and Iran's support for proxy groups. But Iran is only willing to put the nuclear program on the table. For them, those other two things are off limits. And that's a massive roadblock. Okay, so you might be thinking, this is happening thousands of miles away. Why should I care? Well, let me tell you, the global consequences of this are huge, and they could affect every single one of us. It all comes down to this one number, 20%. That is how much of the entire world's oil supply sails through one single narrow strip of water. And that strip of water is the Strait of Hormuz. Iran just showed the world that it can squeeze that choke point any time it wants. And if that happens, it could send a massive shockwave through the global economy, and you'd feel it right at the gas pump. So how is the U.S. responding to all this? Well, they're not just sending strongly worded letters. They are moving a massive amount of military hardware into the region, which sends a very clear signal. The clock is ticking on negotiations. And I really want you to take in the scale of what we're looking at here. This isn't just a couple of ships. We're talking about 2 aircraft carrier groups. Each one is basically a floating city with its own air force. Add to that dozens of the most advanced fighter jets on the planet. This is an incredible amount of firepower all converging on one spot. And there's another huge piece of this puzzle we absolutely can't forget, and that's what's happening inside Iran. The government there is facing enormous pressure from its own people, with some of the biggest protests in years. That instability adds a whole other layer of unpredictability to this crisis. So that leaves us right here with this one massive question. You've got diplomacy on one track and a huge military force on the other, and they are heading straight for each other. Something's got to give. The world is just watching and waiting to see which path gets chosen.